Monaco looked invincible. 2 square kilometers of pure, concentrated wealth. A principality where 1 in every 39 residents is worth more than $30 million. Where the yachts in Port Hercule cost more than most cities' annual budgets. Where even the tax code was engineered to make billionaires feel safe. And then something started to change. Not loudly, not with headlines, but quietly, at the margins, in the shifting composition of the residents, in the architecture of who is arriving and who is no longer there, in the invisible fault lines that run beneath the marble floors of Monte Carlo's most exclusive addresses. The kind of change that a principality built on appearances is structurally designed to deny. This is the kind of story that doesn't surface in travel magazines or government press releases. If you want to understand how empires erode from the inside before the cracks become visible from the outside, subscribe. Empire Falls documents what the brochures leave out. What we are about to examine is not Monaco's collapse. The towers are still standing. The Grand Prix still thunders through those narrow streets. The casinos are still lit. But beneath that performance of permanence, something structural is shifting in who owns what, in who is choosing to leave and who is choosing to arrive, in the demographics of a city-state that has quietly become one of the oldest populations on Earth, and in the invisible competition from rival jurisdictions that are methodically dismantling the one thing Monaco has always sold above everything else: the idea that it is the only address that truly matters. Every empire believes, at its peak, that it is the exception to history. Monaco has believed this longer than most. It is time to examine the evidence. We begin not with the decline, but with the grandeur, because you cannot understand what is slipping away until you understand what was built. Monaco's statistics are so extreme that they border on the surreal. According to Monaco's own statistical office, the IMSEE, the average net worth of a Monaco resident surpasses $20 million, making it one of the highest such figures recorded anywhere on Earth. Over 40% of the principality's roughly 39,000 residents qualify as millionaires. The density of ultra-high net worth individuals, those with assets exceeding $30 million, stands at approximately 1 for every 39 people. No city, no nation, no territory of any scale approaches that ratio. The real estate market reflects this with the kind of numbers that make other luxury markets look provincial. The average price per square meter in Monaco reached approximately €52,000 in 2024, according to IMSI data, a figure that has risen 44% over the past decade alone. In the Larvado district, exceptional transactions exceeded €120,000 per square meter. A single square meter of space in Monaco costs more than most families in the developed world earn in a year. $1 million, according to Knight Frank's analysis, buys you 16 square meters of prime Monaco property compared to 33 square meters in London. And yet, the resale market in 2024 recorded its lowest transaction volume since 2012. Only 365 resale transactions in an entire year, a decline of nearly 6% from the previous year, and the second consecutive annual decline. The people who own Monaco are not selling because they are leaving in triumph. Many of them are simply not moving at all. Others are not being replaced by the same profile of buyer. This is where the story begins to diverge from the official narrative. For decades, the identity of Monaco's resident billionaire class was relatively stable. Russian oligarchs and European industrial dynasties dominated the upper tiers of the wealth register. British non-doms, those who had lived in the UK for decades without paying full UK taxes, represented a significant portion of the professional upper class that chose Monaco as a tax anchor. Formula One drivers, hedge fund managers from Geneva's overflow, the ultra-wealthy retired. Together, they formed what you might call Monaco's permanent aristocracy of capital, a community that reproduced itself quietly, generation to generation, with minimal disruption. That composition is now changing in ways the Principality's marketing apparatus has not fully acknowledged. The Russian layer has largely disappeared. According to Christophe Aversano of Magri Monaco, an affiliate of John D. Wood & Co., Russian buyers who were previously a major force in the Monaco market have largely disappeared in recent years. The precise mechanism is not difficult to trace. The sanctions architecture imposed after 2022 made it legally and reputationally untenable for many Russian nationals to maintain high-profile European residences. Yachts were seized across Mediterranean ports. Assets were frozen. The very visibility that Monaco had always celebrated became a liability. Quietly, that layer of the wealth concentration simply evaporated. This is not a catastrophe for Monaco on its own. There are always new capital sources. And indeed, a wave of British wealth has begun arriving, driven not by choice, but by fiscal compulsion. The abolition of the United Kingdom's non-domiciled tax status, a regime that had stood for 2 centuries, came into effect in April of 2025. The Henley Private Wealth Migration Report forecast a net outflow of 16,500 high-net-worth individuals from the UK in 2025, the largest annual loss on record in the past decade. Monaco stood as one of the primary destinations. Billionaire property developers Ian and Richard Livingstone, whose London and Regional Properties company manages assets reportedly worth around £9 billion, formally relocated from London to Monaco between late March and early April of 2025. They were not alone. According to New World Wealth, a global wealth intelligence firm, approximately 10,000 millionaires left the UK for more favorable fiscal jurisdictions in 2024 alone, a figure that had risen by 157% compared to prior trends. Monaco was cited as a top destination. On the surface, this looks like validation. The city is receiving fresh capital. New billionaires are arriving. But look more carefully, and the picture becomes more complicated. The arrivals from the UK are, in many respects, fiscal refugees rather than true believers. They are coming to Monaco not because Monaco is irreplaceable, but because Monaco is the most convenient tax haven within reach of European life. That is a critically different motivation. The Russian billionaires who spent the 2000s and 2010s in Monaco came for status as much as for tax efficiency. The British non-doms arriving in 2025 are running from a tax code, not running toward a dream. When the next jurisdiction offers a more competitive regime, the calculus changes. And it already is changing. If you have been watching patterns like this across different cities, you already know how this unfolds. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm to keep this kind of investigation alive. Monaco has historically sold itself on 3 pillars: zero income tax, absolute physical security, and irreplicable prestige. The first pillar is facing competition it has never encountered at this scale. The second is increasingly available elsewhere. And the third, the intangible prestige, the sense that Monaco is the only address that truly signals arrival, is quietly eroding. Italy introduced a flat tax regime for wealthy foreign residents, a fixed annual payment that effectively replaces income taxes on foreign-sourced income. The Italian government doubled that flat tax in 2024, making it somewhat less attractive, but it remains a competitor. Switzerland has its lump sum taxation system, long established and institutionally trusted. Portugal offered the non-habitual resident regime for years, drawing a significant wave of international capital before scaling it back. Singapore is aggressively positioning itself as the Asian Monaco, with a tax architecture, security infrastructure, and lifestyle proposition that increasingly rivals the Riviera for the globally mobile, ultra-wealthy. None of these places is Monaco. But none of them needs to be. They only need to be good enough. And for a new generation of ultra-wealthy individuals who grew up in a world of digital nomadism and global optionality, good enough may be sufficient. There is a parallel in economic history that is worth pausing on. In the late stages of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople remained technically the greatest city in the Eastern Mediterranean for decades after the empire itself had begun to fragment. The walls were still magnificent. The churches were still gilded. The markets still functioned. But the trade routes had shifted. The Venetians had found alternative channels. The Genoese had established their own nodes. The empire did not fall because Constantinople became undesirable. It fell partly because the network of dependencies that had made it irreplaceable had quietly rerouted itself. The center held. The periphery moved on. Monaco is not Constantinople, but the dynamic is recognizable. The ultra-wealthy are not a loyal constituency. They are, almost by definition, the most mobile humans on Earth. They have the resources to live anywhere. And the professional structures, the family offices, the tax lawyers, the private bankers, the security teams to instantiate a life of equivalent quality in multiple locations simultaneously. Monaco competes not in a market of fixed demand, but in a market where demand itself is fluid and relentless in seeking the optimal configuration. The question is not whether Monaco will lose all its billionaires. It will not. The question is whether Monaco can maintain the density and the prestige concentration that makes it uniquely Monaco, or whether it becomes simply one of several acceptable options in a portfolio of luxury jurisdictions. The demographic data introduces a dimension of the Monaco story that is almost never discussed in the financial press. Monaco's average resident age stands at approximately 47 years, according to the 2025 census data published by IMSI. The 50 to 64 age bracket is the most represented, making up 23% of the total population. Those over 65 represent nearly 18%. The under 18 population accounts for only 18% of residents. UN population projections, using the constrictive pyramid structure of Monaco's demographics, indicate that the principality faces declining or negative natural population growth, a condition where deaths will systematically outpace births among native Monegasques. In 2025, for the first time in over 30 years of Monaco's recorded demographic history, the natural balance of the Monegasque community turned negative. 84 births of Monegasque nationality were recorded against 93 deaths, a deficit of 9. A single data point, perhaps, but a symbolically significant one for a city-state that has always positioned itself as a place of inexhaustible vitality. Monaco's life expectancy, at approximately 88 years, is among the highest on Earth. This is simultaneously a triumph and a structural tension. A population that lives longer accumulates wealth across longer timescales, but it also ages the social fabric. The Monaco of the casinos and the Grand Prix was built on a mythology of energy, glamour, and speed. The Monaco that is emerging statistically is something quieter. A retirement principality for the world's wealthiest, where the average resident is approaching 50 and the demographic wave is weighted heavily toward those past their peak earning years. This matters for Monaco's vitality in ways that are difficult to quantify but easy to observe. Walk through Monaco's quieter residential streets outside the Grand Prix weekend or the Monaco Yacht Show, and the energy is different from what the marketing imagery suggests. The boutiques on Avenue de Monte Carlo have become increasingly reliant on tourist traffic rather than resident spending. The Formula One Grand Prix, Monaco's most iconic moment, has produced some of the least competitive racing in the sport's modern era. In 2024, by available accounts, there were just 4 overtakes across the entire race, with the top 10 grid order at the start essentially unchanged by the finish. The sport's own experts have noted that overtaking has become structurally almost impossible on Monaco's narrow streets as cars have grown wider and faster. F1 extended its Monaco contract, a sign the relationship endures. But there is a growing acknowledgement within the sport that Monaco produces the least racing of any circuit on the calendar, and that its continued inclusion is as much about heritage and commercial prestige as it is about sporting quality. The race that once defined the glamour of the sport is now, for many, the most boring installment of the season. The spectacle remains, the substance is debated, and spectacle alone is not a foundation. Here is where the patterns of urban empire decline become most legible, not in the dramatic moments of collapse, but in the slow divergence between image and reality. Monaco has always been a performance. The yachts in the harbor are partly decorative, many of them owned by individuals who spend fewer than the required days per year in the principality to maintain their residency. The real estate market, record-breaking in total transaction value in 2024, is now stratifying in a way that reveals its internal stress. The secondary market, where real people buy and sell existing homes, has reached its weakest volume since 2012. The record numbers are driven almost entirely by new build developments, Mareterra, Bay House, where a relatively small number of extraordinary transactions at prices above 20 million euros inflate the total figures dramatically. In 2024, the total value of Monaco's real estate transactions reached approximately 5.9 billion euros, an increase of 80% in a single year, according to IMSEE. But beneath that headline, the number of resale transactions fell to its lowest level in over a decade. What this tells a careful observer is not that Monaco's market is healthy and growing. It tells you that the existing residents are not moving. The market is not turning over. New supply is being absorbed by an ultra-concentrated group of buyers at the very top of the wealth distribution, while the broader market, the layer below the mega-billionaires, is quietly thinning. A former private banker who spent years advising clients on Monaco residency structures observed, in conversation with a financial journalist, that the profile of the Monaco inquirer had shifted meaningfully. The clients arriving in 2024 and 2025 are primarily motivated by one specific event, the UK non-dom abolition, rather than by a long-term vision of Monaco as their permanent identity. They're buying the address, this person noted, not the life. The distinction matters. When you buy an address, you keep looking for a better one. There is a deeper irony in Monaco's current moment that is worth naming directly. The principality became what it is partly through a deliberate act of myth construction. Prince Rainier III, who ruled from 1949 to 2005, understood that Monaco's survival as an independent microstate depended on its ability to project an image of irresistible glamour. The marriage to Grace Kelly in 1956 was not merely a romantic event. It was a geopolitical transaction, the purchase, with Hollywood imagery, of a global identity that would make Monaco legible to an international audience and attract the capital flows that would sustain it. It worked. For decades, it worked spectacularly. But the myth, precisely because it was so successfully constructed, created a dependency. Monaco became hostage to its own image. To acknowledge structural problems is to damage the very asset the image is designed to protect. Property prices must be celebrated, never interrogated. Residents must be counted as arriving, never as leaving. The Grand Prix must be the greatest race in the world, even when it produces no racing. This is what historians of empire recognize as the late-stage performance of invincibility. Rome did it. The British Empire did it. Every great power, at the moment its foundations begin to shift, invests more energy in the theater of permanence. The banners get more elaborate. The ceremonies get more formal. The official statistics get more carefully curated. It does not mean collapse is imminent. Empires in their late stages can persist for remarkably long periods. But it does mean the trajectory is being obscured, and that the gap between image and reality is quietly widening. The competition Monaco faces from rival jurisdictions is not going to diminish. If anything, the global market for ultra-wealthy residency is becoming more sophisticated and more competitive. Singapore has invested heavily in positioning itself as the Asian wealth management hub, with a security infrastructure, English-language legal system, and lifestyle proposition specifically engineered to attract the same profile of individual Monaco courts. Italy's flat tax, despite its recent doubling, remains an option for those who want the European lifestyle without the Riviera price point. Switzerland has the institutional depth and the political stability that Monaco lacks at scale. Portugal, despite rolling back its most generous regimes, remains competitive for a certain tier of European wealth. And there is a broader geopolitical variable that rarely appears in Monaco's official projections. The principality is, for all its independence, essentially an enclave within the French administrative and legal system. France guarantees Monaco's independence under the Treaty of 1918. But French political and fiscal priorities can and do create frictions for Monaco's resident population. French nationals residing in Monaco are legally required to pay French income tax, a carve-out that applies specifically to Monaco among all jurisdictions in the world, a legacy of French insistence that the wealthy enclave on its border not become a tax refuge for its own citizens. As European Union fiscal harmonization pressures increase, as global minimum tax initiatives, the OECD's 15% global minimum corporate tax, agreed in principle by over 140 countries, begin to reshape the competitive landscape, Monaco's structural advantages may narrow further. None of this is visible in the headline numbers. The headline numbers, as we have established, look extraordinary. Total transaction values at all-time highs. New build sales surging. Rents rising. Arrivals from the UK increasing. The principality is, by every official metric, thriving. But empires always look their most impressive just before the cracks become undeniable. Detroit's automotive industry was setting production records in the mid-1960s. The British pound was still the world's reserve currency well into the 1940s. The Venetian Republic maintained its maritime trading dominance long after the Ottoman expansion had begun to cut its supply chains. The metrics of past success can persist, even as the conditions that created them quietly erode. What Monaco is experiencing is not collapse. Let that be stated clearly. The yachts are still there. The casino still turns. The apartments still sell at prices that would be incomprehensible to most human beings on Earth. What Monaco is experiencing is a more subtle and more dangerous thing. The first genuine competition for its identity that it has faced since Rainier and Grace Kelly invented the modern version of that identity 7 decades ago. For the first time, the ultra-wealthy have real alternatives. For the first time, the Principality's demographic foundation is tilting unmistakably toward age. For the first time, the iconic event that announces Monaco to the world every May is being questioned by the sport itself. And for the first time, the residents who built Monaco's reputation, the Russian oligarchs who are gone, the British non-doms who are arriving not from love but from tax necessity, the aging billionaires who will not be replaced by children born on Monegasque soil, are a population in transition. What happens next depends on whether Monaco can reinvent itself again, as Rainier reinvented it. Whether Prince Albert II, who has ruled since 2005, can find for the 21st century what his father found for the 20th, a new story, a new audience, a new source of irreplaceability. The Mareterra land reclamation project, Monaco's most significant territorial expansion in decades, is one answer. Built on reclaimed Mediterranean seabed in the Larvato district, the development adds approximately 3.5 hectares to the Principality's territory and delivers a new residential and ecological district designed by some of the world's most prominent architects, including Renzo Piano. One residence in the Piano Design Tower was listed at €76.5 million. The project signals genuine ambition, genuine investment, genuine belief that Monaco can grow its way out of its constraints. But land reclamation has limits. The sea can only be pushed back so far, and prestige, unlike concrete, cannot be manufactured. The patterns that govern the rise and fall of great cities are not secrets. They are written in the histories of every civilization that has ever elevated one place to the status of the world's most desired address. Alexandria was once the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Constantinople was once the wealthiest city on earth. Lisbon was once the center of a global empire that stretched from Brazil to Macau. Each of them, at their peak, believed they were exceptions. Each of them was wrong. Monaco is not those places. Monaco is, in many respects, a far smaller and more fragile construction. A 2-square-kilometer theater of wealth that has survived on the strength of an idea, the idea that here, and only here, the ultra-rich can find everything they need. Safety, beauty, fiscal peace, and the company of their own kind. That idea is still being sold. The question that this chapter of Monaco's story is quietly beginning to ask is whether it can still be bought. Empires do not fall in a day. They fall in patterns and demographic trends that nobody wants to acknowledge, in competitive pressures that the official statistics obscure, in the slow replacement of true believers by pragmatic tenants. The signs are always there before the end becomes visible. Monaco's signs are there, if you know where to look. The next chapter of this story is already writing itself. Which city do you think falls next? Tell us in the comments and subscribe. We document the decline before the headlines catch up.